Over the course of 10 months, Tsutomu Miyazaki terrorized the people of Tokyo by abducting and killing the most innocent of victims, causing him to be called the little girl murderer by the press. After taking the lives of young girls, he tormented the families of the children by sending them disturbing packages designed to heighten their already excruciating grief. When Miyazaki was finally apprehended, the contents of his tiny bedroom horrified the police and sparked heated debates about the impact violent films and television shows may have on Japanese children and adults. When the Japanese serial killer finally stood trial for his crimes, he further shocked the nation with his callous attitude and bizarre claims, making Miyazaki one of the most disturbing murderers the nation had ever seen. He kidnapped and murdered for young girls. Just 3 months after the death of his grandfather, Tsutomu Miyazaki committed his first of 4 murders on August 22, 1988, when he abducted Mari Kano, a 4-year-old girl who was playing with a friend. After kidnapping Kano, he drove to a wooded area and strangled the child to death. Less than 2 months later, 26-year-old Miyazaki killed his next victim, Masami Yoshizawa, a 7-year-old girl he abducted and took to the same place where he had strangled Kano to death. On December 12, 1988, he kidnapped another young girl, 4-year-old Erika Nanba, drove to a parking lot and murdered the child in his car. The following year, on June 6, 1989, he killed his final victim, Ayako Nomoto, 5, a child he lured into his vehicle and strangled to death. He cannibalized one of his victims and drank her blood. After murdering and dismembering his last victim, Ayako Nomoto, Tsutomu Miyazaki ate some of the young girl's flesh and drank some of the 5-year-old's blood, echoing his earlier practice of eating his grandfather's ashes after the elderly man died, while Miyazaki didn't admit to cannibalizing any of his other victims. It's unlikely he would have stopped this horrifying practice after indulging in it with Nomoto. He was a necrophiliac. As if strangling the life out of his young victims wasn't disturbing enough, Tsutomu Miyazaki also molested and raped the girls after, and sometimes before, murdering them, making him a particularly disturbed pedophile, rapist, and necrophiliac. According to a friend of Miyazaki, the killer had exhibited abnormal sexual behavior for years prior to the murders, which included secretly photographing young girls at sporting events, reportedly as a result of insecurities about his genitalia. Miyazaki's friend stated that the murderer had an extremely small penis, which prohibited him from pursuing romantic or sexual relationships with his peers. He dismembered some of his victims and kept their remains in his bedroom. After killing Mari Kano, Tsutomu Miyazaki dumped the child's corpse on a hillside near his home, but he returned to the site 5 months later and dismembered the 4-year-old's body. Then, he brought the girl's remains back to this home, and he stored the child's feet and hands in his closet, along with her clothing, burning the rest of her body in a furnace and turning the ashes into a fine powder. After strangling his final victim, Ayako Nomoto, and taking videos and photos of the girl's corpse, Miyazaki also dismembered the 5-year-old's body. Initially, he dumped the child's remains into different locations. However, he became concerned that someone might discover the pieces of Nomoto's body, so he retrieved them 2 weeks later and hid them in his home. He took pictures and videos of his crimes. Before and after murdering his victims, Tsutomu Miyazaki, who worked as a photo technician, documented his crimes by taking pictures and videos of the young girls he killed. Prior to strangling Mari Kano, he convinced the 4-year-old to let him photograph her with her clothes on, while in the case of Erika Nanba, who was also 4, he forced her to remove her clothing before taking pictures of her. However, with 5-year-old Ayako Nomoto, he took photographs of the young girl before killing her, but he also brought the child's corpse to his home and took pictures and video recordings of Nomoto's dead body over the course of 2 days. He tormented the families of his victims. As if the parents of Tsutomu Miyazaki's victims didn't suffer enough after their children were murdered and desecrated in such horrifying ways, the killer taunted the mothers and fathers of the girls by sending them disturbing packages. After killing Mari Kano, Miyazaki mailed her family a number of the girls' teeth, pictures he'd taken of her clothing, a postcard containing clues about her death, and some of the 4-year-old's ashes. He sent similar postcards which featured disturbing words that Miyazaki had cut out of magazines to the parents of his other victims. Also, the parents received phone calls from a person, almost certainly Miyazaki, who refused to speak, and if they didn't pick up the telephone, the caller would let the line ring for as long as 20 minutes. He was caught when he abducted a 5th girl. On July 23, 1989, Tsutomu Miyazaki tried to kidnap 2 sisters, but one of the girls escaped, leaving him to force the other child into his vehicle. However, the sister who had avoided the abduction sought the help of her father, who discovered his daughter and Miyazaki in a car at a nearby park. Miyazaki, who ran from the scene, completely naked after the 6-year-old's father caught him taking pictures of his daughter's genitals, was arrested by police when he eventually returned to his vehicle. When he was questioned by law enforcement about the abduction, Miyazaki admitted to being the man responsible for the murders of the 4 young girls. Police found nearly 6,000 videotapes in his tiny bedroom. After Tsutomu Miyazaki confessed to killing 4 children, officials searched his house in an effort to corroborate his claims, and they discovered a collection of 5,763 videotapes. Many of the tapes contained child pornography, which was legal in Japan at the time, as well as violent horror movies, anime, and torture porn. Law enforcement also discovered videos Miyazaki had made to document the murders of the 4 young girls, and they even found parts of Mari Kano's body still hidden in his closet. He said a rat man made him commit the murders. During his trial, Tsutomu Miyazaki showed no remorse for the depraved murders of the young girls, and he made nonsensical statements throughout the proceedings, generally behaving very strangely. While he was incarcerated, Miyazaki told a psychologist that a human or rodent hybrid, known as Rat Man, had compelled him to commit the murders, and he even drew pictures of this malevolent figure. According to Miyazaki, Rat Man had convinced him he would be able to bring his beloved grandfather back from the dead if he killed the young children, leading him to abduct and murder his victims. His father committed suicide because of the murders. Tsutomu Miyazaki's trial lasted from 1990 to 1997, causing the murders to receive extensive press coverage for several years. Sadly, Miyazaki's father was unable to bear the humiliation and shame caused by his son's crimes, so he took his life in 1994 by jumping from a bridge. After Miyazaki learned about his father's death, he expressed no sadness or feelings of responsibility, instead claiming he felt refreshed by the suicide. Despite the tragedy, her son had brought upon a number of Japanese families, including her own. Miyazaki's mother visited him every week in prison to bring him comic books. He was executed by hanging. Despite psychiatrists for both the defense and the prosecution finding that Tsutomu Miyazaki had severe mental health problems, he was determined to be sane. Consequently, after he was found guilty of the murders, he was given the death penalty on April 14, 1997. He later appealed the sentence, but it was upheld by the Tokyo High Court. On June 17, 2008, 45-year-old Miyazaki, along with 2 other inmates, was executed by hanging. However, the horrifying memories of his crimes still live on in Tokyo and around the world, making him one of the worst serial killers in Japanese history. He was born without wrist joints. Tsutomu Miyazaki weighed just 5 pounds when he was born prematurely on August 21, 1962, making him significantly smaller and more vulnerable than most newborns. In addition, from birth, Miyazaki had a physical abnormality that impacted both his appearance and his functionality. His hands were fused to his forearms, making it impossible for him to bend or rotate his wrists. Miyazaki was frequently bullied by other children about his hands, which made him extremely self-conscious and unhappy, and his own sisters found his appearance off-putting, causing him to have a particularly difficult childhood. He was the black sheep of his family. Tsutomu Miyazaki came from a wealthy and highly regarded family. His father owned a newspaper, and both of his parents were hard-working and successful, and they had similarly high expectations for their son. Miyazaki initially performed well in school, and he planned to go to college to become a teacher. However, when he was a teenager, his grades dropped, making it impossible for him to get into a good university. With few options available to him, Miyazaki enrolled in a program to become a photo technician. The young man felt rejected and unloved by his parents and younger sisters, so he was devastated when his beloved grandfather passed away in 1988. In order to cope with the loss of his elderly relative, Miyazaki ate some of his grandfather's ashes as a way of staying connected to the deceased man. He was called the Geek Murderer after he was apprehended. News of Tsutomu Miyazaki's extensive collection of videotapes was released to the media, and the massive amount of anime he possessed caused the press to dub him the Otaku Murderer, which translates to the Geek Murderer. This sparked a backlash from writers and social critics, who argued that violent or sexual anime accounted for only a small portion of the videos found in the killer's home, with at least one person alleging the photos of Miyazaki's video collection were fakes designed to exaggerate the murderer's obsession with film and television. At the time of the killings, there was a lot of negative sentiment in Japan about anime, so some people thought the press may have used Miyazaki's videos to demonize the entire culture surrounding these animated movies and shows.